welcome everyone to another episode of Red Alert. My guest today is a return guest. It's Dan Kovalik, renowned human rights lawyer, author, and documentary filmmaker. Dan, thanks for being back on the show.
Thank you, Adam.
So Dan, we spoke, it must have been a few weeks ago. We had a good long chat actually, about the coup attempt in Venezuela and how that has failed. That's been rumbling on since we last spoke, but today, rather than delving back into that until maybe more has come to light, there were a few stories that have popped up in the meantime that I was really hoping to get your analysis of and your take on. And the first one of those really is a story that is really hard to miss. It's that 5 oil tankers carrying crude oil from Iran have delivered that oil to Venezuelan refineries, despite the fact that the United States of America continues to have sanctions on not only Venezuela but also Iran itself, and that certainly this seems to have heightened tensions. I can't really remember the last time such a big sanction breaking took place that I noticed. So do you want to tell me a bit about that and our listeners? What's the significance of this breaking of sanctions?
Well, it's huge. Now, first of all, so what is being shipped is actually gasoline and chemicals needed to refine oil into gasoline because, of course, Venezuela has the largest known reserves of oil on Earth. So they don't need oil. But what the problem is with the sanctions, they can't get the chemicals needed to refine oil into gasoline.
I see.
And they need the gasoline to power homes in various areas of the country. So a lot of places have been without electricity for a while. And there's been lines, miles long for gasoline because, again, they've been out of gasoline. So what Iran has done is sent 5 vessels with gasoline and also additives to convert oil into gasoline to Venezuela. And this is critical because this is going to help Venezuela power the country. And what that means, practically is not only giving electricity to people, but also water. Because there's 1 million people in Venezuela who are not getting running water because running water depends on electric, energy to power the water running. So this will help with that too. As I understand it, these 5 tankers, and I'm not sure all 5 have reached Venezuela. I know at least a couple have. All 5 tankers will provide Venezuela with about 50 days, I believe, of gasoline necessary for the whole country. And hopefully with the additives also sent and the experts from Iran, the petro experts, they'll be able to help Venezuela, refine oil into gasoline there. So this is very critical. And it is a great victory for both countries because the U.S. explicitly threatened to stop the tankers from reaching Venezuela. And so far that has not happened. So this is a big win for both countries.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about the sanctions last time. I don't want to delve too much into them again, but I think it's worth reminding viewers, or listeners rather, it's worth reminding people that the sanctions the US places upon Venezuela have a human cost. They actually do kill people in terms of, as you say, the lack of access to medicines, the lack of access to electricity, water, and things like this. It was actually just during the week earlier I was rereading some old materials about Iraq and about Libya, and one of the things used in the sort of the casus belli, the cause to go to war, was that the government was not looking after its people well enough, in that you didn't have enough electricity for maternity wards and all these sorts of claims, these mad claims.
Alongside the other Iraqi denials of weapons of mass destruction. My friends, this has been a long and a detailed presentation, and I thank you for your patience, but there's one more subject that I would like to touch on briefly, and it should be a subject of deep and continuing concern to this Council, Saddam Hussein's violations of human rights. Nothing points more clearly to Saddam Hussein's dangerous intentions and the threat he poses to all of us than his calculated cruelty to his own citizens.
Whereas it's actually with the US placing sanctions on countries such as Venezuela that does cause rolling blackouts, that does cause loss of electricity, which does have a real huge toll on the people who need those basic amenities, those basic utilities. And not only that's really interesting. Another story that I only read last night before I went to bed was that Australia is being threatened by the US State Department, and the US State Department saying if Australia decides to involve itself in China's Belt and Road program, which, you know, could lead to jobs, better services, and all sorts of things for Australia, that the US would simply disconnect, was the term used, disconnect Australia from their intelligence networks and things like that. For me, seeing the United States unable to get boots on the ground in Libya was the first time I really saw the US government not getting its way in a military perspective. And I think seeing these 5 Iranian tankers carrying, as you rightly point out, chemicals and things for the refining of gasoline, seeing that just really confident breaking of those sanctions is probably the first time that I've seen a country do that. Do you know of any other examples in recent years where perhaps sanctions have been broken this flagrantly?
Well, certainly Russia has been getting, and China have been getting various materials into Venezuela, which definitely are breaking the sanctions. But of course, Russia and China are more, have more parity with the U.S. in terms of military power. So it's a little tougher for the U.S. to bully them. I'd like to note that Russia just recently sent a 5-month supply of insulin to Venezuela, because that's one of the things that Venezuela has been denied from getting due to the sanctions. Yeah.
I mean, insulin of all things, that is shocking.
HIV medicines, chemotherapy medicines, dialysis equipment, all these things have been denied Venezuela due to sanctions, and during a pandemic. I mean, it's just shameful, absolutely shameful.
That is shameful. So, I mean, obviously these 5 ships full of these chemicals, and it's going to have a huge impact on Venezuela being able to produce gasoline, be able to keep the lights on, things like that. Why is gasoline such an important thing for Venezuela? We know that it is since before Chavez's time. You mentioned it in the last interview. Some places have been referred to by American politicians as banana republics, and Venezuela has very much been an oil republic or a gasoline republic. So tell me why is gasoline such an important part of this picture then, and what's the scenario with that?
Well, I mean, as you say, for about 100 years, the U.S. Has controlled Venezuela's oil, has profited from it after wrenching control away from Britain, by the way, in the early part of the 20th century. And Chavez changed that by nationalizing Venezuelan oil and using the oil.
Well, this was brought up in the comments of the last interview. It was, I think someone had pointed out that that the industry had been nationalized before Chavez. It was just that Chavez was the first one who used the profits of the industry to actually, like in a socialist sort of a way. I did a little bit of reading about it, but obviously I don't know very, very much about it. But that seemed to be that some of the industry at least had been nationalized prior to Chavez. It was just that he actually started using it for the people rather than just for the United States.
Well, some of it had been nationalized, but not entirely. I mean, right. ExxonMobil still had a huge interest in Venezuelan oil, as did Chevron. Chevron was probably the most recent company to lose its oil rights in Venezuelan oil. The Koch brothers as well had interest there. So that's not totally true that it was all nationalized before Chavez. But it is true that Chavez used the nationalized oil for social programs. In fact, the World Bank applauded Venezuela and Chavez at times for its ability to use the profits from oil to reduce poverty and extreme poverty.
Oh yeah, absolutely. With huge medical programs, house building programs, education programs, literacy programs, and all sorts of different social support for the poorest people in Venezuela. So with the ability to refine more gasoline, obviously Venezuela's economy is not just gasoline being sold between different cities in Venezuela. I'm sure a lot of that gasoline goes to other countries, including the USA. And one story that's coming to light is the selling of Citgo, is it? Do you want to tell me a bit about that story there that's breaking?
Yeah, so, I mean, at one point, Citgo, which is was Venezuela's U.S. Oil gasoline company. At one point, up till recently, it was Venezuela's single greatest source of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States, under Trump, I mean, there's no other way to put it, stole it from Venezuela. They took it from them. And they are now, a court has now approved Citgo to be sold to a Canadian mining company. So you see their single greatest source of revenue just being stolen from them now. I mean, it's just incredible.
And the court, is that an American court or is that an international court?
An American court.
An American court. So an American court decided that America could sell a foreign nation's company. That seems almost as brazen as driving tankers through sanctions. I mean,
well, yeah, I mean, this is nothing but imperial theft, colonial theft, and the same thing's happening with the Bank of England, which is selling off of some of Venezuela's gold reserves there. Again, this is nothing but imperial plunder of the type that we would associate with, or bygone years, but it's happening right now.
And the Bank of England story is particularly interesting as well, because from what I was reading, that the Venezuelan government had said some time ago that they wanted some of that gold bullion that they had stored in the Bank of England. They wanted some of that gold back again, to which the Bank of England just said, no, you're not getting it. So this time around, they said, well, look, what we want to do is we want to actually sell the value of some of that gold and use the money to buy relief efforts for coronavirus and things like that. So they're really very openly saying, we want to spend this money on humanitarian issues. There's really no reason to say no to that. But I'm sure that the Bank of England and the British government will say no again. There's going to have to be a legal battle, isn't there?
Well, yeah, and I don't know if Venezuela will win it. I mean, because, the Western courts continue to rule in the favor of the Western countries in their theft of all these riches from Venezuela. I mean, the system is stacked against Venezuela. It's quite amazing. And shocking what's happening. And again, all this is happening during a pandemic that Venezuela is doing as well as it is in fighting the pandemic and keeping the numbers of people infected and dying down is actually quite remarkable, given how these sanctions are just decimating their economy.
And that the way that these sanctions and the colonial theft, as you say, it has that human cost. It decimates the economy of Venezuela. It ruins and indeed ends the lives of many people. And it's horrific that certain governments around the world, such as the US and UK, turn around and say, and even the media, as we mentioned before, are so complicit in this. They point to that rack and ruin and say that country clearly can't govern itself. It needs us to sort it out, even though it is the impact of imperialism that has caused the problems that has ruined. I mean, Venezuela, whenever the drop in oil prices occurred around 2014, was it? Obviously, there's a huge impact upon them, but there was nothing like what we're seeing now with, as you say, insulin having to be donated from other countries. That's not a result, is it, of Venezuelan government incompetence? That is a direct impact of all the things that we've been talking about to date. And you obviously have great connections with Venezuelan people and organizations and things like that. What's your sense that you're getting from this? Are people saying in Venezuela, oh, well, our government is failing us? Or do you think that this does engender a sense of, hold on a minute, we're being treated really unfairly by the likes of the Bank of England, by the likes of the United States government?
I think most Venezuelans understand that this deprivation is being imposed from abroad, from the countries like the US and the UK. Obviously, there are people amongst the opposition in Venezuela who are trying to use this for their political advantage. So, of course, they blame the government for these woes. And, of course, the irony is that it's members of the opposition like Juan Guaido who are participating in the colonial theft because, for example, with Citgo, what the U.S. did was help replace the board of directors of Citgo, removing Venezuelan government officials and putting people loyal to Guaido on the board. And those people on the board have been complicit in selling Citgo to a foreign company in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And so, just tell me a bit about, just so people can picture it, what exactly, I mean, Citgo, it's a gasoline, so is it like there's Citgo stations around America that you can go and fill up your car in? It's that kind of a setup, is it? That kind of company?
Absolutely. They're all over the U.S. In fact, in Pittsburgh, where I live, there's a few Citgo stations here. And in fact, before all this happened with the U.S. taking control of Citgo, a lot of us in the Solidarity movement used to try to go to Citgo to support Venezuela because of course that revenue was going to Venezuela. You know, that now, of course, that's not true. Now it's going to be going to a Canadian mining company. But yeah, it's like a BP station or whatever. Mm-hmm. And again, Venezuela got huge revenue from this, and now it's gone.
And that revenue will be going into the bank accounts of yet further millionaires and billionaires rather than into the national coffers of Venezuela, where it would be spent on those social programs and helping those most in need.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. More socialism for the rich and more deprivation for the poor. So, Dan, I really appreciate every minute of time that you give me because I know you're a busy man.
Oh, sure.
So we see big stories there. Again, sanction breaking, the theft, essentially colonial theft of a nationalized Venezuelan company, and the continued holding of Venezuelan gold in the Bank of England, who have just decided, like the Elgin marbles, they're just going to keep it. They're just going to hold on to that and can't trust people with it. That's one thing that just reminded me of is, the Spanish Civil War, when that took place in the Spanish Republic, a democratically elected socialist republic, called out to Europe for help. This precursor to World War II with fascist Franco launching a coup d'etat. When they asked the Western governments for help, what did they do? The UK and France froze Spanish bank accounts, refused to return their gold to them, refused to allow anyone to travel to Spain to take part in defending the Spanish democratically elected socialist republic. It seems sometimes that history does have a tendency to repeat itself when it comes to these capitalist nations and colonial countries. Their attitudes towards anything was even a whiff of socialism to us.
Absolutely. And again, even before, countries were socialist, the imperial powers would engage in this sort of conduct. Of course, Lenin, at one time when he was living in London, he went to the British Museum and he was like, here is where, what British stole from the Egyptians, and here is what Britain stole, that all these antiquities were stolen goods. And that's true in most Western museums. And it's an example of how the West has plundered the developing world.
And Lenin said the competition between the capitalists within the European nations, the colonial and post-colonial, as they would be now, nations, he said the competition between them was precisely why something like the European Union would never work, because they're not all friends. They are competitors economically and for wealth and things like that. But that's another story for another day and another debate. Dan, look, thank you so much for the time you give me today. Great to talk to you, and hopefully we'll have you back on maybe in another month or so as this thing develops even further.
Sounds great. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.